2 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 1. This know also, that in the last days perilous times shall come. First and foremost, I want to give all praise, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rachak Quadash. Double honors to the elder apostles, the elder bishops, the elders of Great Millstone, who rule very well, very beautifully. Double salutations be unto the Akim, out here pushing his gospel and truth and his sincerity to the best of their ability, given to them by Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai. Slack, peace, blessings, and salutations be unto the elect scattered abroad. May the election of Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Lord willing, fall upon your houses. This is Brother Quanah Watt come back at you, Lord will, with that edifying lesson. Their spirit and power of Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Lord will. It is edifying, Lord will. It is straight to the point. And we are definitely, at the point of no return, right? Things are not, they're not going to get better, right? People are hoping and praying that the economy, right, the global economy, and more specifically, right, the American economy, right, is going to get better, and it's not going to, right? We're absolutely at the end, and things are only going to continue to get worse. 2 Esdras 14 and verse 16, right, greater evils than that which we see now, right, are going to happen, hereafter, right? Very soon are we going to see, in the article, right, I got this article as well as another one, right, they ultimately outline that there's going to be panic, right, in the streets, right, from these everyday Americans, right, as prices continue to go up, right, as more and more people are getting laid off, as you see right here on the end time headlines. It says more than 5,100 freight-related layoffs hit U.S. supply chain sector, right, which freight is ultimately dealing with the transfer, of goods from one place to another, right? As this continues to happen, man, people are going to be put in a more dire situation, right, with their finances, right? They're going to start having to, cut back on certain things, give up certain things. And that's going to put people in more of a stressed out and depressed, and in a panic, mindset, right? So I'll start with this article right here. It says a sweeping wave of layoffs and facility closures has hit the U.S. supply chain, with more than 5,183 workers affected across at least 20 states. According to a report from FreightWaves by Noe Mahoney, the cuts stem from shutdowns, restructurings, customer contract losses, and operational consolidation in logistics, manufacturing, and transportation, right? Meaning they're scaling down, right? They can't afford, right? These businesses can't afford, these prices, with tariffs, right, being, established, it's costing, these companies, right, more money to receive these products, which we're getting from, different countries, right? And see these companies are pushing that, that cost on the consumer, right? But they're still having to, pay that bill as well, right? Because less people buying means less, profit or revenue, right, that these businesses have, which means they're going to have to buy less product, right? So their overall business is affected, right? It says major employers, including Fresh Realm, Geodis, Ryder, and DSV have announced significant workforce reductions as companies seek to cut costs amid softening industrial demand. Right? Nobody is buying as much, right? Because ultimately the dollar don't have as much buying power. More and more countries are ditching the dollar, right? Going digital. Right, especially 2024 when Saudi Arabia, right, ultimately ditched the dollar. Right, they didn't even enter into or renew the treaty, right, because they had a treaty going in 1974, 1973, 1974. Actually, it was not 1974, right? It was just after, right, that oil embargo, right, that had happened, which ultimately had it to where prices across America. Really was a global thing as well, but really here in America for about 6 months, prices were extremely high, man. right? And what we see happening now it happened back then, but see this time it's going to be far worse. You know, they were going through a 6 month, stint of, you know, them oil embargoes, right, being established. And it took, a decade or two, right, about a decade and a half, like 10 to 15 years, right, for the economy to kind of come out of, that position that it was in, right, to basically recover. It took a long time. And you had a lot of companies, ultimately shutting down shop, people getting fired, you know. See, it's going to be the same thing, but in this time, it's going to be far worse, right? Far worse. It's not just embargoes, right? It's actual oil not being shipped out, right? Not receiving any kind of oil at all, right? Which when there's, oil, when there's a low supply of oil, and I keep talking about it, right? Just the basic understanding of, supply and demand, right? The inflation, right? When supply is low, prices go up, right? Because demand is high, which means it has higher value at that point, right? When supply is up, right? Meaning there's abundance of it, right? The demand isn't as high, right? People already have it. People are not going to panic because it's in abundance, which means the price goes down, right? See, prices are going to shoot through the roof. They're already getting higher, but they're going to shoot through the roof, and it's going to be real bad, right? It says one of the largest blows comes from California-based Fresh Realm, a supplier of ready-to-eat meals for brands like Blue Apron. The company filed for Chapter 2 bankruptcy protection following a 2025 Listeria outbreak, laying off more than 1,000 workers nationwide. Specific cuts including 228 positions at its Tracy, California facility, which is set to close permanently on June 27th, 637 in Linden, New Jersey, and 121 tied to operations in Lancaster, Texas, right? It says third-party logistics providers faced similar pressure from lost contracts. Geodis issued a warn notice for 238 layoffs at its Rialto, California warehouse starting July 3rd. DSV plans to close its Edwardsville, Illinois facility, affecting up to 163 jobs, while Ryder System expects to terminate 151 workers in Green Bay, Wisconsin, after a key customer contract was not renewed. So you have these major companies, right? Amazon's mentioned in there, as well as others, are doing mass layoffs, man. And this is ultimately according to prophecy, right? Let's go into what is it, Isaiah the 24th chapter. This is Isaiah chapter 24. And I'll start at verse 7. It says, "The new wine mourneth, the vine languisheth, and all the merry-hearted do sigh," right? These people are in a state of mourning, right? These people are in this joyous, state, right? These people are, you got videos, people constantly crashing out, man, in their cars, people just, crime is going up as well. Everything is completely changed, right? Verse 8 says, "The mirth of Taberah ceaseth, the noise of them that rejoice endeth, and the joy of the harp ceaseth." And you don't see as many people going out, to, go to the movies or, go out, to the malls, and, less and less people are able to go out because one, prices are going up, and two, hey, these people are constantly depressed, right? These people are constantly stressed out, because of what's happening, because of, they basically everyone's got to have two jobs, right, in order to survive, and that's still not enough. Right, verse 9, it says, "They shall not drink wine with a song. Strong drink shall be bitter to them that drink it. The city of confusion is broken down," right? America is being destroyed, right? Internally, right? And eventually externally, right? It says, "Strong drink shall be bitter to them that drink it. The city of confusion is broken down. Every house is shut up, that no man may come in. There is a cry for wine in the streets. All joy is darkened. The mirth of the land is gone." That's right, And really, I wanted to grab this, in Ecclesiastes, which I was fire too, but Ecclesiastes 12 and verse 3, it says, "In the day when the keepers of the house shall tremble, and the strong men shall bow themselves, and the grinders cease, because they are few, and those that look out the windows be darkened. And the doors shall be shut in the streets when the sound of the grinding is low, and he shall rise up at the voice of the bird, and all the daughters of music shall be brought low." So, which is, again, this is the original precept I wanted to bring out, but that was fire as well, in the Isaiah, the 24th chapter, because, again, that shows you just, the mindset of these people because of them losing their jobs, because of prices going up. This is the state that the people are in. And really, you go to Proverbs 29:2, it tells you that people, when the wicked are in authority, the people mourn. And these people are in mourning, man. Right? We understand that Esau is trying to, transition from, one world order to the next, right? To the new world order, where he ultimately has, a digital society established and has everyone, connected to that, that system. So he's trying to get rid of, the physical currencies. And again, he has to destroy, this current system, and we're in the part, in the transition, right? And it's not a easy, smooth transition. Hey, this is the damn devil, man. So you best believe he's going to ultimately make it to where people suffer, right? To where people are ultimately losing drastically, right? Because he has something called, what is he, his MO, right? With MO, right? Mode of operation, right? Order ab chaos, right? Order out of chaos, right? So he creates, this chaos, so he can bring about, his NWO, right? His new world order, and that's how he's trying to do it, and people are suffering in the meantime, right? As the transition continues, right? And is being made, right? The people are suffering in the meantime, right? They're losing their jobs, right? People are struggling just to, get by food, and to make matters worse, you got, again, the oil, right? It's still not, the Strait of Hormuz is still not open, right? This is on the Newsbreak app, right? It says Market Insider. It says point of no return. A research firm says the oil market is headed for a dire turning point by early July, or it's like early June, right? Which is in the next few weeks, right? It says the oil market could reach a grim turning point in the next few weeks, HFI research says. The firm sees real panic hitting crude markets as oil inventories run out. Previously, it speculated that panic buying and hoarding could send crude prices past $150 a barrel, which, Iran at one point was talking about, it being $200 a barrel, man. Iran is ultimately, because of what America's doing, they don't give a shit, and really, they're even pointing out that, the American government don't give a shit about their own people, so why would they care, at that point, man? So they're ultimately stating, hey, it could go up to a 200, right? Which is going to make matters drastically worse. It says market watchers have puzzled over the reasons for oil's resilience in recent weeks, but things could be about to change for the worse. One research firm is warning. HFI Research, an investment research firm with a focus on energy markets, said it sees the oil market hitting a major turning point in the first week of June. If the Strait of Hormuz remains closed through that time, oil markets will likely descend into real panic, it said, suggesting that nations around the world could start panic buying and hoarding oil as oil inventories hit rock bottom, right? Everybody's running out of oil, And I was watching, the elder Maya Ka'ala, do his lesson, and it was a spirit that, he was touching on this as well, right? That those famines that are coming, and, he made a statement that, America, has a lot more oil, than a lot of, a lot of countries. Like America has, an abundance of oil, but see, America exports that oil, right, to these different countries, and it, it doesn't necessarily use its own oil, because those are, you have to ultimately be set up, to refine this oil that America has, right? You have to heavily refine it. And America doesn't, America's oil refineries are not, are not set up or equipped, to refine their own oil. They export their oil and buy in, easier to refine oil. But see, that oil is not coming through. That oil is not being sent out. So America is ultimately screwed. Now, recently, with, Trump, nabbing up, Maduro and his wife and basically taking over, right, Venezuela, right? We received about 30 to 50 million barrels of the Venezuelan oil, right? And one refinery in Texas, right, had just switched over to refining that oil. But who's to say that that's going to be, first and foremost, enough? One refinery operating and refining oil, that's still not going to be enough, to ultimately sustain, the American people, right? And then you had recently, I want to say a few weeks ago, you had the last shipment, right, coming to California, right, dropping, I think it was 2 million barrels of crude oil, right? So 2 million times 42, because each barrel is about 42 gallons, and roughly, I think, in California, they're using about, 200,000, 300,000, roughly just in the state of California, right? Oil, 200,000 to 300,000, barrels of oil every single day. And it could be more, So that last little bit is ultimately, that's it. There's no more coming in. Shit is about to get really fucking bad out here, man. People are going to start, ultimately wigging the fuck out, right? It says the scenario, right? It says which HFI said wasn't its base case, is contrary to where most forecasters think that crude market is headed. The firm pointed to more optimistic oil forecasts about how the market would soon normalize, but those predictions are likely fueled by psychological biases in the oil market, it said. Right? It seems clear to me that if the Strait of Hormuz is still closed by the first week of June, we will see real panic. The firm wrote in a Substack post on Monday of the coming turn point in markets, and really that was, the point. You can go and you can read, the rest of this article, but that was the point that I wanted to read, right? If it stays closed, and it will, right, it's going to remain closed because they can't come to an agreement, right? Iran sent an agreement, and Trump ultimately denied it, right? Trump sent agreements and Iran denied it. So they're not going to come to an agreement. They're not going to come to some kind of peace deal because, first and foremost, we're not in the time of peace, right? Ecclesiastes 3:1 says, to everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under the heaven. Dropping down to verse 8, it says a time to love and a time to hate, a time of war and a time of peace. And we're in the time of war. Hence the reason why you've seen, Trump, and the Secretary of Defense be switched over to what? The Secretary of War. And none of these peace deals, right? The Board of Peace that Trump ultimately tried to set up, right? Not even, America's allies want to be a part of that, right? Again, showing you, right, that we're not in the time of peace. We're in the time of war, right? So these peace deals are not going to happen, which means the situation is not going to be made better, right? Oil, the Strait of Hormuz is not going to be opened, right? They're even talking about another strait, right? The Iranian government is talking about another strait that they can ultimately close down, which will further harm, the American people. And that's exactly what they said. That's exactly what was stated. So it's like things are only going to continue to get worse, man. And we're warning you people, man, to return, you Israelites, you so-called Blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans, as well as your Israelite foreigners, right, to ultimately return, man, before it's too late. Because, again, it's about to get really bad. And there not being any kind of food, there not being any kind of water, right? Because you people think that you're good now because there is food, there is water, But it's going to be far worse. 2 Esdras 16, what is that, verse 21, if I'm not mistaken, right? It says, behold, victuals, right, meaning that food, water, shall be so good, cheap upon earth, and they shall think themselves to be in good case. You think you're good, right? You people think that this is, is just it's just like 1973. You think it's just like the 2008, housing market crash, and all these different things that that you can talk about in history. You think that this one situation is going to be just like the rest, and that's not the case, right? There's too many signs. There's too much evidence showcasing that we're in the absolute last days, and that this time that's coming is going to be far greater than any time that we've ever experienced before, right? All right, so you think, as it says right here, they shall think themselves to be a good case, and even then shall evils grow upon the earth, sword, famine, and great confusion. So a death is about to encompass the world, not just here in America, but the world. It's just gonna hit America a hell of a lot harder because you Americans, think that you're just, you're good, you're solid, right? You've never really been in adversity like that compared to the rest, these people of these different nations, having to deal with these different wars and, like the Palestinians, the Gazians, like they're going through it. They're a hell of a lot more resilient than a fucking American, right? As soon as an American, maybe is an hour or two short on their fucking paycheck, they want to trip the fuck out, or if, prices for a gallon of milk goes up 30, 40 cents, hey, the people want to trip out. Hey, well, how much more, right? When the prices jump 100-fold, what kind of situation, how are you people going to react when that happens? Because it is going to happen, and we'll come back to that. Revelation 6 and verse 6 being the point, it says, I heard a voice in the midst of the four beasts say, a measure of wheat for a penny, and 3 measures of barley for a penny. See thou hurt not the oil and the wine. The oil and the wine goes into this truth, but the point being, what? A measure of wheat for a penny. So basically like a full measuring cup, right? Of wheat, right? Which makes about 1 loaf of bread. It says for a penny. When you go into that word penny, it goes back to the Greek word denarion, which goes into a Roman's day's wage, right? So take your day's wage, right? However much you make hourly, right? Times about how many hours you work in that day, and imagine, we're talking about a loaf of bread being that much, right? And we already had seen it recently. I did a video on it a few weeks ago, maybe, I want to say like 2-3 weeks ago, maybe like 3 weeks ago, of what's going on over there in Australia, right? You had a dude, a young man, ultimately, showed the video. You had one of those, things of oil, olive oil. That shit was $65, right? A case, a 12-pack of soda, that shit was $40. The little 8-ounce cans of soda, the 12-pack, that shit was $40. And that shit's going on over there in Australia, right? Now they're not broadcasting these things, which would cause wide panic. But they don't, which is what they don't want. They want to be able to make that transition, right, as smooth as possible. But see, the Lord is stepping in. The Lord is stepping in, and it's getting out of their hand, man. Because this is prophecy, right? It's prophesied that these things would happen, right? Prices are going to go up, right? The supply chain is being, damaged. So there's not going to be any food coming in, and the price for that food is going to go up. Let's go back to that second Esdras, the 6th chapter, and the 22nd verse, right? It says, and suddenly shall the sown places appear unsown, and the full storehouses shall suddenly be found empty. Again, because the supply chain being hindered, people are losing their jobs, companies are shutting down, truck drivers are losing their licenses. So you're not going to have food being transported from, these cargo bays, right? Cargo ports to these warehouses, then to these stores. It's not going to happen, right? We're coming to a point where that is slowly but surely, right? And it's actually picking up steam now, right? It is coming to a halt, right? So not only is there, because there's so many things that are taking place right now, man. It's like, man, call all Yahweh Shem El Shah, because you at the southwestern hemisphere, or 63% of America, has experienced the worst drought, the first 3 months in about 1,200 years, right? The next time period that can match up to what's going on now was 131 years ago, right? But over the last 1,200 years, the 63% of America has never experienced the kind of drought and dryness that it has been experiencing now. showing you that we're absolutely at the end. Which it hinders your crops. It hinders, what I mean, the food that's here, right? The animals, the crops, and so on and so forth. Which means there's no food being grown, right? The fertilizer that comes from the Middle East, that's not being brought over, right? The Lord is ultimately attacking America from all sides, and this is why, again, we're blowing that trumpet, Ezekiel 3:17, right? To give you warning from the Lord. Right, telling you shit is about to get really fucking bad, man. And if you don't turn to Yahweh Shem Yahshua, you're gonna be fucked. Right? Verse 3, it says, and the trumpet shall give a sound, which when every man hear it, they shall be suddenly afraid. Right? Jacob's trouble, the hour of temptation. Which the fullness of the hour of temptation is what? The mandatory implementation of the RFID microchip. Right? Which is the ammo to the TB. But nonetheless, leading up into that point, it's just going to continue to get worse and worse and worse as the days go on. Right? It says, at that time shall friends fight one against another like enemies. And the earth shall stand in fear with those that dwell therein. The springs of the fountain shall stand still, and in 3 hours they shall not run. So not only is there not going to be any food, there's not going to be any water. Right? So a famine. Going back to that 2nd Esdras 16th chapter, right? These people thinking that they're good, right? As of right now. But again, as it said, right, evil shall grow upon the earth. We'll read this again. 2nd Esdras 16:21. Behold, victuals shall be so good, cheap upon earth, that they shall think themselves to be in good case. And even then shall evils grow upon the earth, sword, famine, and great confusion. For many of them that dwell upon the earth shall perish of famine, and the other that escape the hunger shall the sword destroy. Right? Because you're going to have people, right? 2nd Esdras the 15th chapter. We'll read that. 2nd Esdras 15 and verse 16. For there shall be sedition among men, and invading one another. They shall not regard their kings nor princes, and the course of their actions shall stand in their power. So as things continue to get worse, these people are going to wig the fuck out. These people are going to sit there and say, fuck it. Right? I'm about to lose my job, or I do lose my job. Whatever money that I have left, credit cards, this and the third, right? People are maxing out their credit cards, So people don't have that extra money, that cushion to be able to, rely on until they can get another job, right? And even if they do, there's no jobs. So they're going to have to spend all that money. And eventually it's going to come to a point where they can't just keep spending that money. They got to save it so they can pay rent. Eventually they're going to say, fuck it, I'm going to go into these stores and I'm going to take that food, right? Which is going to further aid in these storehouses being empty, right? It says, and man shall desire to go into a city and shall not be able, right? At some point, right, it's going to be, so now you got, local police, right? They're going to get overtaken. There's going to be too many people coming in. They're going to have to bring in the military. Now they're going to set up checkpoints. You know what I mean? They're going to be setting up curfews and so on and so forth. So not only is there going to be curfews, whatnot, it's also going to be chaos in the cities, man. People breaking in and stealing shit. Right? Verse 18, for because of their pride, the city shall be troubled, the houses shall be destroyed, and men shall be afraid. Again, going back to that trouble. Right? Verse 19, and man shall have no pity upon his neighbor, but shall destroy their houses with the sword and spoil their goods because of the lack of bread and for great tribulation. So these people are going to end up picking up guns, weapons, and fighting to the death just to get a fucking can of fucking peaches, man. This is a fucking can of beans, right? Can of lentils. And it was one of them small ass half a cans, for condensed milk. People are going to be fucking killing each other for that shit, man. And that's what it's talking about. Right? Shit's about to get bad, right? It says right here, and that was ultimately the point I wanted to grab. But I'll verse 22 again, 2nd Esdras 16, verse 22. For many of them that dwell upon the earth shall perish of famine, and the other that escape the hunger shall the sword destroy. Right? Yeah, there's going to be mass death that's going to encompass the world. Especially here in America. Right? Because once people start really catching wind of what's going on and seeing things start getting a little bit worse, people are going to start panic buying. And that's, again, going to aid in the storehouses being empty. And when people start going into these storehouses, it's going to cause further panic. These are all things that are prophesied. We're reading it out of the Bible. right? You're either going to get right with Yahweh Shem Shai, or you're going to be screwed, man. There is no ifs, ands, or buts. This is the only, Yahweh Shai said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life, right? Yahweh Shai is the only way. And the only way that you're going to be able to receive Yahweh Shai is if you follow him, right? And follow his men that follow Yahweh Shai. Paul said what? Keep the ordinances as I deliver them to you, right? He said, follow me because I'm following Yahweh Shai, you know? And this is what we're to do, you know? Because this is about to get bad, man. This is Zephaniah chapter 2 and verse 1. It says, gather together, yea, gather together, O nation. Gather yourselves together, yea, gather together, O nation not desired. Before the decree bring forth, before the day passes the chaff, before the fierce anger of Yahweh by Hashem Yahushua come upon you. And the Lord is pissed. All the wickedness and evil that's being done in the world. You have the prophets out here and the prophets are still having to deal with this shit. Come on, man. Yahweh Shai is pissed, man. It's only been about 2 days, right, since Yahweh Shai, was here on the scene, man. Been 2 days, because one day with the Lord is 1,000 years to us, right? So it's been 2,000 years, just over 2,000 years since Yahweh Shai was here on the scene, right? So really it's only been 2 days and he's pissed, and watching all this iniquity, ultimately, be done in the earth. Fuck no. Lord's starting to start judging this place as he is doing now, right? A hell of a lot more, man, in the days to come. It says, before the day of the Lord's anger come upon you, seek the Lord, all ye meek of the earth, which have wrought his judgment. Seek righteousness, seek meekness. It may be hid that ye shall be. It may be that ye shall be hid in the day of the Lord's anger. And the way that you're going to be hid is the Lord ultimately protecting you, right? As it says in Psalm 91, right? He that dwelt in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under that shadow of the Almighty, meaning that protection, that divine protection, right? That grace. All those outside of that are going to be screwed. You read that Isaiah 65 and verse 13, right? He said, my servant shall eat, but ye shall be hungry. My servant shall drink, but ye shall be thirsty. That's what the Lord is going to do for the elect. Everyone outside of that is going to be destroyed. And that's thus saith Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai. So repent, right? Turn to Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai, you Israelites, you so-called blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans. And Lord, will we be a part of the elect. The Lord will protect us in these times. Because without the Lord's protection, man, we're done, right? We're at the point of no return. So with that, Lord will is edifying, Lord will straight to the point. I want to give all praise, honor, glory to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rachak Wadash. Double honor to the elder apostles, the elder bishops, the elders of the great millstone. Till next time, I say shalom.